Hello everyone. 大家好。皆さん、こんにちは。안녕하세요, 여러분. Welcome to CJK Languages with me, Matthew. Chinese, Japanese, and Korean. 那你们最好学どれが一番難しいですか？おぬごしがじゃん強いんだよ。In this video, I will do a comparison between Chinese, Japanese, and Korean. Before we begin, you need to keep in mind that deciding to learn a language is your personal choice. And there is no such a thing as a language that's better than the others. They all have their advantage. For example, if you learn Chinese, you have the ability to speak the second international language with 1.3 billion native speakers. And if you learn Japanese, you'll be able to watch anime without the subtitle. And if you learn Korean, you'll be able to watch Korean movies or Korean dramas without the subtitle. So in this video, I will divide it into 5 parts. It is history, reading and writing, pronunciation, grammar, and similarities. And in the end, I will give a conclusion which is the hardest and the easiest. And let's jump into the first part. Talk about the history. These 3 languages belong to the different language families. Chinese belongs to the Sino-Tibetan language family, Japanese belongs to the Japonic family, and Korean belongs to the Koreanic language family. Let's talk about Chinese first. Among that 3 languages, Chinese is the oldest, which dates back to over 300 years ago. Chinese is divided into 4 main periods. That is Proto-Chinese, Archaic Chinese or Old Chinese, Ancient Chinese or Middle Chinese, and Modern Chinese. The Proto-Chinese period is the period of the most ancient inscription and poetry. Most loanwords in Chinese were borrowed after that period. The works of Confucius and Mencius mark the beginning of the Archaic Chinese period. Modern knowledge of the sounds of Chinese during the Ancient Chinese period is derived from a pronouncing dictionary of the language of the ancient period published in AD 601 by the scholar Lu Fanyan, and also from the works of the scholar official Sima Guang, published in the 11th century. Chinese is a kind of pictograph. Its root is like picture, representing the meaning of the word with picture. Oracle-bound script, or Jia Gu Wen, is an ancient form of Chinese character that is the oldest known form of Chinese writing. Chinese characters continue to evolve, eventually becoming the Chinese character we know today. In the early 1900s, a program for the unification of the national language, which is based on Mandarin, was launched. This resulted in modern Standard Chinese in 1956, a new system of romanization called Pinyin, based on the pronunciation of the character in the Beijing dialect, was adopted as an educational instrument to help in the spread of the modern standard language. Modified in the 1958, the system was formally prescribed in 1979 for use in all diplomatic documents and foreign language publication in English-speaking countries. Now let's talk about Japanese. Before the 4th century AD, Japan did not have a writing system of its own, and it gradually began to adopt the Chinese script. It merged the Chinese character into their own Japanese style. Kanji are based on Chinese character transmitted to Japan during the spread of Buddhism in the 5th century via the Korean peninsula. Chinese characters were introduced to Japan through imported articles, and it is believed that Chinese immigrants wrote the first Japanese document. Over 100,000 of these logogram or visual word symbols exist, but only about 5,000 to 10,000 are in common use today. Chinese characters were introduced to Japan via official seals, swords, coins, and other decorative items imported from China. The earliest record of such an import was the King of Nagoshio gold seal in 57 AD from the Emperor Guangwu of Han to a Hua emissary. The Chinese coins and inkstones used in calligraphy and painting, which are also of Chinese in origin, have been found in Yayoi period archaeological sites. It started at the beginning of the Neolithic in Japan, continued through the Bronze Age, and towards its ends crossed into the Iron Age. The early Japanese most likely had little to no comprehension of the writings and would remain relatively illiterate until the 5th century AD. The Kojiki and Nihon Shoki, the oldest book chronicling the history of Japan, speak of a scholar named Wani who was sent to Japan by the kingdom of Baekje, a Korean kingdom during the reign of Emperor Ojin, bringing with him teaching of Chinese characters and Confucianism. The earliest Japanese documents were believed to have been written by bilingual Korean and Chinese official employees at the Yamato court. The group of people called Fuhito, organized by Emperor Sun of Liu Song in 478 AD to read and write classical Chinese in Japan. During the reign of Empress Suiko 573 to 628, the Yamato court began sending all-out diplomatic missions to China, resulting in an increase in China literacy in the Japanese court. When adopting the character, the Japanese did not only introduce the character's original Chinese pronunciations, but also associated them with the corresponding native Japanese word and their pronunciations. Consequently, most kanji can still be pronounced in at least two ways, a Chinese onyomi and Japanese kunyomi way, which considerably further complicates the study of the Japanese language. Kanji are used for writing nouns, adjectives, adverbs, and verbs. But unlike the Chinese language, and seeing Chinese and Japanese are two very different languages with two very different pronunciation systems, Japanese cannot be written entirely in kanji. For grammatical endings and words without corresponding kanji, two additional syllables based script are being used, hiragana and katakana, each consisting of 46 syllables. Now let's talk about that two writing system, hiragana and katakana. Hiragana came from kanji, but it has been a smooth transition. Before hiragana, there was another script called Manyogana. To put it simply, Manyogana was a set of kanji that was used to write Japanese phonetically. The interesting fact is, kanji are not used phonetically at all. They are pictograms that represent word or part of word and phrase, especially in Japanese. But with Manyogana, people were able to start writing Japanese phonetically. Here are some of the examples. As you can see, these are basically kanji, and this fact caused quite a lot of confusion. When writing letters or scriptures using kanji as well as Manyogana, things got quite a bit more complex, and there was no real way of telling whether a character is used phonetically or as a pictogram, and it created a bit of a barrier to reading and thus learning and knowledge spread. So, eventually, an easier script was starting to take shape, and the shape of the new script derived from the cursive way of writing of kanji or shoujo, which was traditionally used by women more than men. This is believed to be one of the reasons why hiragana was first popular among women. Historically, as in many other countries, women did not have access to the same levels of education as men, which means that early hiragana was used by women courtiers. This also leads to some of the greatest works of literature of Japan being written in hiragana only because women wrote them. In the early 90s, standardization came when inevitable variations of hiragana were all brought together under one umbrella, and the standard hiragana script we use today was agreed upon. The throne characters were named hentai-gana, or kana of unusual form. Another name for hentai-gana is itai-gana, a non-standardized form of the character. Hentai-gana is still used occasionally today in some contexts, such as store signs and logos, to achieve the old-fashioned or traditional look. What about katakana? Well, they also evolved from manyogana, but they were simplified by other people, namely by Buddhist monk Nara. So here, if you want to look the origin of various hiragana and katakana characters. Last, let's talk about Korean. Korean language history is divided into three main periods: Old Korean, Middle Korean, and Modern Korean. Before we get into the discussion of Old Korean, let's discuss what was originally spoken of the Korean Peninsula. Most scholars think that by 600 CE, when the Old Korean period started, what we today call Korean was already the dominant language of the Korean Peninsula and perhaps the only language spoken there. But there are signs that Korean had much more linguistic diversity before this period. Two early Chinese histories from this era, Wei Shu, the Book of Wei, and Hou Han Shu, the Book of Later Han, give indication that some part of Korean had Japanese-like names and were inhabited by Japanese-like groups several centuries before the Old Korean period. There is also evidence from Korean history record of multiple languages coexisting in Korean. It seems likely that at some point in early Korea, the peninsula was home to multiple language groups, including some people who spoke an ancestor of the Japanese language. Now let's talk about the first period, Old Korean. The period between the 600s to the 900s is known as Old Korean, the earliest documented period of the Korean language. The stage of the language was not written in the Korean alphabet Hangul. It hadn't been invented yet, but was instead written with Chinese characters, just like kanji in Japan, but which are called hanja in Korean. Hanja literally means Chinese characters, brought over from Buddhist and Chinese literature. As you might guess, Chinese characters are well suited to write Chinese, but they cannot immediately be adapted to write other language because they are so closely associated with particular meanings in Chinese. This became a problem for Old Korean scribes. Most Old Korean texts are really just written in classical Chinese, but Korean scribes also wanted to write words in their own language. To get around these problems, ancient Korean scribes started using Chinese characters in two ways, sometimes with their original Chinese meaning and sometimes to just mean the sound of the Chinese word to sound out a Korean word. This makes Old Korean really challenging for scholars to read today because it's not immediately clear if the character is meant to be Chinese or Korean. The scribes who wrote Old Korean spent years of study to master Chinese, which meant that literacy was limited mostly to elites, Buddhist priests, and government officials. For the modern reader, reading these old texts requires years of study in classical Chinese, classical Korean, and linguistic methods in order to begin decoding texts. Despite decades of research, what we know about Old Korean is still not much more than educated guesses. Education in Korea was based on Confucianism. If you were a monk or had top-tier bank account, Hanja was out of reach for the lower classes. Therefore, most people in Korea were illiterate. Ordinary people couldn't petition their government, write love letter, or learn about the world outside their village. Their identity was limited to oral traditions, and even for the elite, their part of their cultural identity was borrowed. Next is Middle Korean. Middle Korean is generally thought to span almost 700 years from the mid-900s when the Korean peninsula became fully occupied by the Koryo Kingdom to around 1600 when the Japanese invaded Korea. The first 500 years of this period, 900s to 1443, are referred to as Early Middle Korean, and this language was written like Old Korean using Chinese characters either to represent one word or to sound out a Korean word. However, this changed dramatically. King Sejong of the Joseon dynasty, often called Sejong the Great, he was born in 3097 at the dawn of the Joseon dynasty. King Sejong was a scholarly leader. He helped codify the calendars and organized the first farmer's handbook to spread useful farming techniques across the peninsula. Starting in 1443, King Sejong commissioned the creation of an alphabet called Hangul, and on October 9, 1446, it was presented to the Korean people in a document or book. It's called the Hunmin Jongum, the correct or proper sounds for instructing the people. King Sejong personally wrote the preface. He described the text as a way to answer the cries of the illiterate. He wanted to democratize written language and give everyone a shot at moving up the social ladder. King Sejong was troubled by the lack of literacy among the common people and was moved to create a simple writing system that anyone could learn without extensive education in Chinese. After the invention of Hangul, we have essentially perfect knowledge of both the sound system and pronunciation of Korean. Hangul was quickly adopted by the women and popular writers of the time, the lower classes. They could learn independently without formal schooling. They could express themselves with their own word and alphabet. They didn't need no education. They didn't need no thought control. This creation of a native writing system was a defining moment in Korean history, and it's still celebrated every year on October 9 when the Hunmin Jongum was published. Known as Hangul Day or Hangulnal in South Korea, but in North Korea is known as Joseongul Day or Joseonggulnal and is celebrated every January 5th in North Korea. If you take a stroll down Gwanghwamun Square or Gwanghwamun Wangjang toward Gyeongbokgung Palace in heart of Seoul, you'll stumble upon a 6-meter statue of King Sejong the Great. However, that doesn't mean Hangul is 100% accepted. Hangul wasn't received well by the Yangban, a class of aristocrat government workers and Confucian scholars. The Yangban held all the keys. They regulated and bureaucratized Korea's government. To become a Yangban, you needed to pass the Gwago. This was a monster test that measured reading and writing in Hanja. The test required years of study and a deep bank account. Almost anyone could take and pass the exam. But where's your average peasant farmer going to get that stretch? As you might have guessed, the Yangban were Hanja fanatic. For them, Hanja was the one true writing system to rule them all. It separated the monetarily superior from the monetarily inferior. If the new peasant writing were to infect their bureaucratic fortification, Hangul might have spelled the end of their rule. The Middle Korean period texts give us a lot of information about the language grammar and sounds, and an educated speaker can probably understand a fair amount of Middle Korean if they read diligently, especially if they use a dictionary. If you have learned Hangul, you may be surprised to see that there were some additional letters in Hangul when the alphabet was first invented. The Middle Korean period ended at around 1600. The stability of Korean society during this time was shattered by the Japanese invasion of Korea between 1592 and 1598, which brought untold destruction to the peninsula. Decades later, when Korean society finally recovered and people began to write literature once again, many spellings and conversation were adapted to reflect change in how people now spoke. And the last one is Modern Korean. Modern Korean is generally thought to have begun in the early 17th century and continues to the present. But even in this period, Korea was not free from problems. Japan colonized Korea in 1910. They declared Japanese the official language of Korea. They banned the teaching of Korean literature and forced Koreans into economic and sex slavery. However, the Japanese wanted to keep their blood pure. They forbid Koreans from taking Japanese names. They thought a wave of Koreans might infiltrate their borders and pass themselves off as Japanese. The Japanese imperial government largely let Korea do its own thing. They allowed Hangul to be taught and studied in schools and universities. After a few centuries of colloquial use by the brave Korean folk, Hangul was messy. It lacked a central organizing body for several centuries. There were some overgrown letter form and grammar rules that needed trimming. Throughout the effort of groups like the Korean Language Society or Hangul Habwe, reforms in 1912 and 1930 codified Hangul's letter and orthography. However, as World War II heated up, Japan tightened its grip. In 1938, Japan adopted a policy of assimilation. Korean culture was outlawed. Schools could no longer teach Hangul. All official documents were to be written in Japanese. The Korean Language Society fought to keep the language alive by publishing and spreading of journals describing Hangul. Talk about Hangul text, educated speakers of Korean today won't have much trouble reading Hangul text from the 1700s onward. Though the style and vocabulary may sometimes sound archaic. Although Chinese characters continue to have some limited use in the modern language, especially in academic, historical, and religious contexts. Modern Korea is characterized by the almost exclusive use of Hangul in writing, especially since 1946, when the fall of Imperial Japan brought Korea freedom. For the first time since its birth, Hangul became both the official language of the Korean government and the Korean people. Though Korea split during the Korean War or Hanguk Jeonjang, both North and South Korea declared Hangul their official language. Fruits of King Sejong's labors bear fruit today. With its easy-to-read letters and logical-based system, both Koreas declare their people nearly 100% literate. Hangul helps define the people of this small peninsula as uniquely Korean. And it aided South Korea in octupling its GDP and becoming a pop culture and tech powerhouse. Even though Koreans no longer use Chinese characters in writing, the language is still full of words borrowed from Chinese. But modern Korean also has a growing number of words borrowed from English too. Many of them for modern objects like computers in Korean, computer, and television in Korean, television. Some Korean words are fusions of a Korean word and an English word, like sogeting, meaning blind dating, a combo of soge, introduction, and English meeting. Occasionally, European words were borrowed into Japanese and then later made their way into Korean, and each change along the way sometimes resulted in strange words that most Koreans don't know are borrowings at all. As Korean culture becomes ever more popular across the globe, the Korean language continues to change in the 21st century, with new words coming into the language and being innovated. After a long talk about the historical background, let's move on to the next part. Talking about reading and writing, it can be said that Chinese is the hardest one. Altogether, there are over 50,000 characters, though a comprehensive modern dictionary will rarely list over 20,000 in use. An educated Chinese person will know about 8,000 characters, but you will only need about 2 till 3,000 to be able to read a newspaper. Chinese writing is ideological, which that each character has one or several meanings. And when combined together, they create even more meanings. For example, Tian means electricity, and Hua means talk or speech. When combined, Tianhua means electric speech, which means telephone. Another example, Ta means big and Xiao means small. When combined, Ta Xiao means big small, which means size. In Chinese, they are also radicals. Radicals are used to index the character for Chinese dictionaries. They are rote equivalent of an alphabet, being the building blocks of the Chinese characters and often reflecting some common semantic or phonetic characteristic. For example, the word how, which means good. It is essentially a radical for ni, it's female, which here can also be interpreted as mother, and zi, child next to each other, and the mother together with child is good. So that's why this character how means good. Let's go to the next radical example. This is ko. Can you guess the meaning of this radical? Look at the shape. What does it look like? Yes, that's right. It means mouth. So everything related to the mouth has this co-radical. Take a look at the following example. This is chi, which means eat. Of course, we eat using our mouths, right? That's why Hanzi chi or eat use the co-radical. And this is chang, which means sing. And of course, we sing with our mouths, right? And that's why Hanzi chang or sing also use the co or mouth radical. Also, there are two different written forms of Chinese: traditional and simplified. Traditional Chinese preserves the orthodox character that have been used for thousands of years. As its name suggests, simplified Chinese consists of simplified version of the traditional Chinese characters. When the People's Republic of China was established in 1949, the literacy rate in China was around 20%. Believing the steep learning curve of traditional Chinese character to be a factor, the government launched a campaign to promote literacy and education by simplifying the writing system. Approximately 2,000 traditional characters were modified, primarily by reducing the number of strokes and or merging the characters. Throughout the 50s and 60s, simplified Chinese was adopted in mainland China, Malaysia, and Singapore, while the people of Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Macau continue to use the traditional writing system. Because simplified Chinese characters have fewer strokes than their traditional counterparts, and therefore have simpler, less ornate structures, there is an opinion that traditional Chinese has a deeper meaning compared to simplified Chinese. Let me show you one example. This is Sin radical, which means heart, and this is Hanzi I, which means love in simplified Chinese, and this is I in traditional Chinese. Can you see the difference? If you look closely, I in traditional Chinese has the same radical, right? But I in simplified Chinese remove the same radical in it. So, some of those who still use traditional Chinese say, how can you love someone if you don't use your heart? What do you think, guys? We've been talking about Chinese, but what about Japanese? Well, Japanese can be said to be on the medium to difficult level for both its writing and reading system. As I mentioned it in the history part before, there are three kinds of Japanese writing system: kanji, hiragana, and katakana. As I've explained it before, Kanji are Chinese characters that the Japanese adopted a long time ago in order to write their language. Japanese people are expected to learn around 2000 kanji by the time they finish junior high school. These are the characters you'll be expected to learn if you want to enter the Japanese university, pass the JLPT test, and read most of books, magazines, manga, and school textbooks. Kanji is arguably the hardest to learn compared to hiragana and katakana, especially for speakers of language that use the Latin alphabet. But for Chinese speakers, kanji is not a problem for them. At least they only learn how to pronounce it in Japanese and the meaning which can be different in Japanese. Because in Japanese kanji, there are some kanji characters that are exactly the same as Hanzi character in Chinese and have exactly the same meaning as in Chinese. But there are also some kanji characters that use exactly the same character as Hanzi in Chinese, but the meaning can be very different in Japanese. For example, in Chinese, this is 学生, and in Japanese is gakusei. Both have the same characters and the same meaning, which is student. But check this out. In Japanese, this is tegami, which means letter. And in Chinese, this is 手纸, which means toilet paper. See, they both use the same characters, but the meanings are very different. Okay, now let's talk about hiragana and katakana. Well, hiragana and katakana are not hard to learn. Both of them has 46 basic characters, each representing a key sound or syllable. Beyond that, it includes a few transformations called dakuten, handakuten, and combinations. Characters generally represent a whole sound like ka or ta, rather than individual letters like k or t. So, for example, arigato, Japanese for thank you, is typically written arigatou using hiragana characters, whereas America is written America using katakana. Hiragana and katakana have their own function. Hiragana is used to write words that are originally from Japan, such as place names in Japan, Japanese terms, and names of Japanese people. For example is konnichiwa or hello, and oyasumi nasai is good night, and sumimasen or sorry or excuse me, and itadakimasu to humbly receive, often said before eating a meal. While katakana is used for words borrowed from other language. Foreign terms, places names outside of Japan, foreigners name, not Japanese people, and foreign brand names. For example is computer or computer, and interneto or internet, and Rondon or London, and Brado Pitto or Brad Pitt, and McDonald's or McDonald's. There's even a song with a theme about it. Check this out.
マクドナルド、グーグルトイレと、キットカット、ディズニーランド、タクシーがホテル、セブンイレブンミルク、バス、ビール、スターバックス。
Actually, there is also something called Romaji. They are the romanization of the Japanese language. In other words, writing Japanese words with the Western alphabet. As a reminder, if you want to learn Japanese, you cannot choose to learn kanji only, hiragana only, or katakana only. Because in Japanese writing system, all that three can be used together. Yes, that's how unique the Japanese writing system is. Finally, let's talk about Korean. For the writing and reading system, it can be said that Korean is the easiest. The Korean alphabet Hangul, which is sounded out phonetically like the English alphabet. It has 14 consonants and 10 vowels and can be quite fast and logical to pick up. There are some easy associations to connect the letters to what you already know in English. Once you know Hangul, you can immediately read words, even if you don't know the meaning of them yet. From there, you can take your skills to the next level by learning new Korean words as you are learning Korean vocabulary. Let's take a look at the Korean alphabet. The phonetic Hangul chart showing consonants in the columns and vowels in the rows. Learning Hangul is like math, like the times table, or like a puzzle game. Trace a finger across the chart until they meet. Then, combine the vowels with the consonants. Take a look at this example. G sound plus A sound, Ga sound. D sound plus O sound, Do sound. There are vowel combinations and double consonants. Also, ing makes no sound when in front of a vowel, as in ya, and ing makes a ing sound when ending a letter, as in dong. You can also create a vocabulary like this. Han sound plus guk sound become Hangul or Korean. Ga sound plus da sound become Gada or Go. A sound plus G sound become Agi or baby. Bul sound plus Go sound plus G sound become bulgogi. Bulgogi is Korean barbecue beef. So sound plus Ju sound become soju. Soju is Korean alcohol drink. See, Hangul, it's easy, right? There's a Korean people say like this. A wise man can acquaint himself with them before the morning is over. Even a stupid man can learn them in the space of 10 days. Then, what about Hanja? Do Koreans still use Hanja? The answer is yes, although much less frequently than in the past. Hanja has not entirely disappeared from Korean culture. In some instances, Hanja is still used in modern Korean society to add nuance, clarity, or aesthetic value to written text. Today, Hanja can still be found in legal documents, scholarly articles, newspaper, personal names, academic research, and sometimes on street signs. Particularly in the fields of history, linguistics, and religion. Additionally, the calligraphy of Hanja is considered an important traditional art form in Korea. In South Korea, some schools teach Hanja as part of their curriculum, while in North Korea, the use of Hanja is considered more significant, with students learning up to 2,000 characters. In conclusion, while the utilization of Hanja has significantly diminished in recent time, it is still present in various aspects of Korean society. Its history, cultural significance, and continued limited usage ensure that Hanja remains an important part of Korea's rich linguistic heritage. Well, now let's get to the next part. For pronunciation, Chinese is also the hardest. In Chinese, there are 21 consonants and 24 vowels. With different combinations, we can create more than 400 monosyllabic sounds together. Another thing that makes Chinese difficult is Chinese it is not phonetic. That means you must memorize the sound and meaning of characters separately, as some characters have multiple pronunciations and meaning. As I told you in the history part before, that Chinese has Hanyi Pinyin, or often abbreviated as Pinyin, which is a romanization system for Chinese. It can be helped foreigners to pronounce Chinese. Sounds easy, right? But it's not that easy. You have to be careful, because the sounds that pinyin letters represent does not correspond exactly like in English letter or any language that use alphabet. Each Chinese sound is associated with one syllable, and each Chinese character has its own pinyin syllable. For example, in English, B we pronounce like B, but in Chinese we pronounce it like P, P. Another example is in English, G we pronounce like G, but in Chinese we pronounce it like K, K. Also, another thing that makes Chinese difficult is tones. Chinese is a tonal language. In order to differentiate the meaning, the same syllable can be pronounced with different tones. Chinese tones give it a very distinctive quality, but the tones can also be a source of miscommunication if not given due attention. Chinese is said to have 4 main tones and 1 neutral tone. Be careful. If you misread pinyin and mispronounce the tone, it will have a very different meaning. Pay attention to this. First is the flat tone. Example, ma, that means mom. And next is the rising tone. Ma, that means hem or flag. Next is the falling then rising tone. Example, ma, that means horse. And the next is the falling tone. Ma, that means or used to nag or verbally abuse. And the last one is the neutral tone. Ma, that's used for question marker. Also, take a look at these following sentences. 我想买一辆车. I want to buy a car. 我想买一辆车. I want to sell a car. Can you see the differences? The difference is in the words buy and sell. In Chinese, buy is my and sell is mine. You can notice that the difference is in the tone. Buy is My, it use the falling then rising tone. And sell is my, it use the falling tone. At first glance, the Hanzi does look similar to, right? But if you really look closely, you can notice the difference. Therefore, you must also pay close attention to the Hanzi. Take a look at some other examples. Gongji is rooster, and Gongji is attack. Ni Hen Pang is you are awesome, and Ni Hen Pang is you are fat. And the last example, 我要问你 is I want to ask you, and 我要问你 I want to kiss you. So be careful if you meet someone and you want to ask them something. If you mispronounce the tone, you might get slapped for thinking you're a pervert. How about Japanese? For Japanese, pronunciation is the easiest compared to Chinese and Korean. Japanese does not have tones like Chinese. In fact, once you get used to the basic sounds of the language, it's actually fairly easy to start reading and pronouncing Japanese words correctly. And how about Korean? Well, it can be said that the difficulty level of pronunciation in Korean is in the middle. Korean pronunciation is vastly different from English, and it takes a lot of particle to be able to pronounce words correctly. The biggest mistake you can make is to assume that the pronunciation of a Korean letter is identical to the pronunciation of that letter's romanization in English. This is simply not the case, and is a mistake that virtually all new learners of Korean make. So, that was the explanation about pronunciation. Now, let's move on to the next part. Now, let's talk about grammar. Chinese, Japanese, and Korean have different grammar and sentence structures. In comparison to Japanese and Korean, Chinese grammar is relatively simple. Just like in English, it has a subject, verb, and object structure and does not rely on inflection heavily. The tenses, numbers, and genders of Chinese verbs do not change. Japanese grammar is more complex, with a subject, object, and verb sentence structure. It employs particles to represent grammatical relationship between words in a sentence. Japanese verbs change depending on the tense, aspect, mood, and level of politeness. Korean, like Japanese, it has a subject, object, and verb sentence structure. It indicates grammatical relationship and verb tense using particle and verb endings. Korean verbs vary according to tense, aspect, speech level, and politeness. Here are examples of sentence structures in Chinese, Japanese, and Korean. For example, I drink water. In Chinese is 我喝水,我喝水. 我 is a I, is a subject, and 喝 is a drink, is a verb, and 水 is a water, is an object. So is subject, verb, object. Like in English, right? That is subject, verb, object. Now in Japanese is 私は水を飲む. 私は水を飲む. 私 it means I is a subject, And mizu is a water, is an object. And nomu is mean drink, is a verb. So it's subject, object, and verb. Now it's in Korean. In Korean is 저는 물을 마셔요. 저는 물을 마셔요. Jo is a I, is a subject, and 물 is a water, is an object, and 마셔요 is a drink, is a verb. See, unlike in English and Chinese, where the sentence structure is subject, verb, and object, the sentence structure in Japanese and Korean is the same, which is subject, object, and verb. Now, let's get into the last part, which is similarities. Because Japanese and Korean have Chinese roots, there's a lot of similar vocabulary between these three languages. Linguists believe that around 60% of Korean words and 50% of Japanese words come from Chinese. Let's take a look at the following similarities examples. Telephone in Chinese is 电话. In Japanese is 電話. In Korean is 電話. Library in Chinese is 圖書館. In Japanese is 図書館. And in Korean is 図書館. Cheers in Chinese is 乾杯. In Japanese is 乾杯. And in Korean is 烘焙. Skin in Chinese is 皮膚. In Japanese is 皮膚. And in Korean is 皮膚. And that's it. The 5 parts on comparing Chinese, Japanese, and Korean languages. And as I said at the beginning of this video, I will give you the conclusion, which is the hardest and easiest. Here is the conclusion of the difficulty level of the 3 languages. Last but not least, I'll show you a few clips which use the 3 languages so you can listen and compare the sounds of their 3 languages.
对香港人来说，过新年一定要派利是，也就是通常说的发红包。在香港，只要是已婚人士，基本从出门开始就要不停地派钱。香港人会在口袋里准备不同级别的利是，以便派发给不同关系的人。而利是的金额不求大，从10元、20元到几百块都有。人们通过用这种方式向身边的人表达新年的祝福，但对一些人来说，也形成一种类似務必要給的壓力。
ということで今回は大津波警報も発表されていることもあって、震源の位置であるとかを考えてみると、揺れの特徴として本当に直下型と、その海溝型といいますかね、そういうのがこう合わさっているような、そういった印象を受けましたけども、
そうなんですよ。でね、こちらをご覧いただきましょうか。これがですね、19時10分までの24時間に起きた地震の震源をプロットしたものになります。実際はこの16時10分前後のその地震以降に起きたものが大半を占めているんですけども、
보여지는 부분들에 있어서 대표로 약간 그리고 총대를 많이 맨다고 생각하시면 편할 것 같아요. 그냥 뭐든지.
그런 거 있을 것
귀찮은 거 다
사무실과 이 우리 팀과의 어떤
이게 제일 큽니다. 인간 다리 힘들 것 같아. 그러니까 팀을 대표해서 회사 입장도 저 대변을 해줘야 돼요. 팀에다가 얘기할 때. 동시에 팀원들의 얘기를 또 회사에다가 전달해주는 역할이 필요해요.
물건이 있네요. 한이 있네요.
네, 있습니다.
그리고 제가 지금 말하고 싶은 걸 정확히 다 얘기하고 있어서.
그 중간에 끼어가지고. 아니 근데 리더로서 이렇게 통솔하다 보면은 싸움이 생기잖아요.
진짜 남자들끼리인데.
남자들끼리인데 그리고 갈등이 생길 때 어떻게 해요? 막 소리 지르고 싸우고 막 그런 적도 있을 거 아닙니까?
And yeah, that's it. I think it's enough. So, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And please share this video. And please support me by subscribing to CJK Languages. Alright, thank you guys and see you in the next video. 谢谢. Arigatou gozaimasu. Kamsahamnida. Bye bye.